So, when you dropped this huge stack of sources on our desk and asked us to look into Dr. Paul A. Posey's work, the mission you gave us was, well, it was pretty clear right from the start. We're doing a deep dive today into excerpts from his deeply personal book, Unloved, the residue of dysfunction, along with his professional bio, the website for his veteran owned organization called Negative to Positive Inc., and his YouTube channel.
All right, it's a lot of material to cover, but it all connects in this really profound way.
Yeah, exactly. And going through all of this, a very specific image just kept coming to mind to explain what we're actually dealing with today. Imagine you own a house, right? And one day you notice this jagged crack running down your living room wall.
Oh, I hate when that happens.
Yeah,
Your immediate instinct is just to fix it as fast as possible.
exactly. You grab some spackle, you patch it, paint over it, and boom, problem solved. Except, a few months later, the crack is back and it's even wider. In life, those visible cracks might look like maybe a sudden burst of anger, or a job you keep self-sabotaging, or even a marriage that just falls apart.
Yeah. With visible damage.
Right. You can patch the drywall all you want, but if you don't actually inspect the foundation for things like severe childhood influences or, father wounds, the house is just going to keep settling and the walls will keep cracking. So our goal with this deep dive is to explore the raw reality of men's mental health, dissect the actual mechanisms of generational trauma, and then examine Dr. Posey's tactical blueprint for men who are looking to rebuild that foundation.
And I think what makes his methodology so compelling is that he treats trauma not as some abstract clinical theory, but as a practical lived experience.
Yeah, it's very grounded.
Completely grounded. I mean,
Right.
we spend so much of our lives reacting to the visible damage, like your patched drywall analogy, while
Yeah.
completely ignoring the structural reality underneath it all. To understand the solutions he provides, we first have to assess the water damage in the basement. We really have to confront the wreckage of the past.
We do, and the root of his entire philosophy really starts in Gary, Indiana. He was the middle child of five, a group he actually later refers to in his writings as the dysfunctional five.
Which immediately gives you a sense of the heavy emotional baggage we are unpacking here.
Oh, for sure. And from the outside, the family facade was flawless. They went to parades, they attended festivals, they walked to school together. They had these seemingly normal latchkey afternoons.
Right. Outward perfection. But inside the home, the structural collapse began with the arrival of a stepfather. And the way this arrival is described in the text is just incredibly jarring.
Because there was no warning, right?
Exactly. There was no warning. There was no wedding. Just a man who suddenly moved into their home, described almost like a storm with no forecast. He was cruel, deceitful, violent, and just highly destructive. He actively hated the presence of these five children.
That sounds absolutely terrifying for a kid.
It was. And in the middle of all this chaos and fear, their mother, who had been this very strong figure working demanding shifts at a steel plant, became essentially powerless. She stayed.
Wow. Which brings us to the title of his book, Unloved. And he makes a very careful distinction here, which I think is crucial. Unloved didn't mean they lacked a roof over their heads or didn't have dinner on the table. It wasn't about, material deprivation.
No, not at all. He defines it as the numbing of joy. It was the psychological toll of watching a mother choose her own survival over the protection of your children. The defining characteristic of their environment wasn't just the violence, it was the deafening silence they experienced from the one person who was supposed to keep them safe.
Right, because kids look to their parents for everything.
Exactly. Children look to their primary caregivers to understand how the world works. When a parent remains silent in the face of abuse, the child learns that their safety is not a priority. They learn that silence in the face of suffering is just normal.
The numbing of joy is just such a heavy, defining phrase. But the story reaches this incredible, almost paradoxical climax of clarity years later. Fast forward to 2012, Dr. Posey is an adult, and he is driving with his mother to Indiana.
This is such a pivotal moment.
It really is. During this drive, he gently confronts her about their childhood. And she admits to him, without any anger in her voice, just stating it as a pure, unvarnished fact that she never loved any of them.
Just unbelievable to hear that from your own mother.
Right. Most people would be completely shattered by their own mother sitting in the passenger seat and delivering that line. So I gotta ask, how does someone actually process the ultimate rejection and flip it into personal liberation?
Well, think about it like spending your entire life suffering from a mysterious, painful illness, right?
Oh,
You go to countless doctors, try different remedies. You constantly wonder, what you're doing wrong to feel this way.
Like you're broken, but you don't know why.
Exactly. Then finally, a doctor sits you down and gives you an accurate, albeit terminal, diagnosis. Hearing the news is painful, of course, but the immediate secondary emotion is relief. The mystery is over. You can finally stop taking the wrong medicine.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense.
Yeah, for his entire life, Dr. Posey had been trying to solve this puzzle, looking for a mother's love that he assumed was just hidden, or that he somehow hadn't earned. When she said, "I never loved you," it was the diagnosis he needed. He realized he was looking for something that never existed in the first place.
So he just stopped searching. And that closure fundamentally shifted how he viewed himself and, more importantly, how he started viewing the men and youth in his own community.
It really did.
He took that profound personal realization and turned it into a diagnostic lens. He stopped looking at youth violence and street anger as random acts of bad behavior and started seeing them as symptoms of a much deeper structural failure.
Yeah, there is a vital concept in his work where he says, what we're witnessing is pain looking for language.
Pain looking for language. I love that.
It's so accurate. When you see kids on the street wearing this intense bravado, looking at strangers with hostility, or waking up expecting death because life hasn't given them a reason to expect anything different, that isn't natural confidence.
Right, it's a shield.
It is armor. It is forged from the exact same numbing of joy he survived. When children are not taught the vocabulary to express that they feel unsafe, terrified, or unloved, that massive amount of emotional energy doesn't just evaporate.
It has to go somewhere.
Exactly. It metastasizes into aggression, self-destruction, or complete emotional shutdown. It is literally their pain trying to find a way to speak through their actions.
And if they don't find that language when they are young, they drag that damage right into adulthood. Let's look back at the dysfunctional five for a second. The text notes that by 2011, every single one of those 5 siblings had been married and divorced.
Which is a staggering statistic for one family.
It is. And Dr. Posey is remarkably candid in his own writings about his role in his failed marriage. He admits he destroyed it because he was subconsciously searching for a mother's love instead of showing up as a husband. He was substituting sex for genuine emotional connection.
And that makes total psychological sense because physical intimacy is often much easier to achieve than the terrifying vulnerability required for actual emotional connection.
Especially for someone who learned early on that vulnerability leads to pain.
Precisely. This is the exact mechanism of how the residue of dysfunction operates. Unspoken expectations and behavior patterns that you inherit dictate your adult relationships. You project a massive childhood deficit onto an adult partnership.
Which is an impossible weight for any marriage to support.
It really is. Unless a man actively maps out his own emotional landmines, he's guaranteed to step on them.
The way you brought these sources together, it makes me think of generational trauma as a kind of financial inheritance. Usually we think of inheriting a house or a stock portfolio. But Dr. Posey is showing us that we also inherit deep emotional debts, relational bankruptcies, and terrible behavioral habits.
We never asked for them, but our name is on the account.
Exactly. And just like a financial debt that gets passed down, the interest compounds over time. Eventually, someone has to pay the bill. The debt collectors always come calling, usually in the form of a major life crisis, a shattered identity, or a court date.
And that compounding interest on emotional debt is exactly what destroys families generation after generation. To stop men from defaulting on their lives entirely, Dr. Posey realized he couldn't just diagnose the trauma he had to build an active intervention.
Right, because diagnosing it isn't enough.
Exactly. Paying off that kind of debt requires extreme self-awareness and absolute accountability, which brings us to his methodology.
So to understand the actionable solutions, we really need to understand the man behind the blueprint. To his childhood friends, he's khaki, but professionally, he is Dr. Paul A. Posey, and his resume is heavy.
Extremely heavy.
He is a retired Marine gunnery sergeant with 23 years of honorable service. He is a certified life coach, an anger management specialist, and he holds a doctorate in humanitarianism. He is also listed as a mental health first aider.
That last one is really interesting.
Yeah, I want to pause on that term because it sounds like a corporate buzzword, but I assume in this context it has real tactical weight. What does a mental health first aider actually do?
It's a crucial certification that functions similarly to physical triage in a combat zone. A mental health first aider is trained to identify, understand, and respond to signs of mental illnesses and substance use disorders in real time.
Okay, so they're on the front lines.
Right. They aren't necessarily long-term therapists, but they are the immediate intervention. They know how to de-escalate an active crisis, stabilize the individual, and prevent a temporary mental health emergency from becoming a permanent fatality.
Wow, so it's about applying an immediate tourniquet to a psychological wound so the person survives long enough to get the deeper surgery they need?
That's a perfect way to put it. And that triage mentality is the foundation of his organization, Negative to Positive Inc., or N2P.
Yeah, N2P. This is a 100% veteran-led initiative that has mentored over 100 men through what they call change agent workshops. The goal is to provide a roadmap from where you are to who you are meant to be. But how does a workshop actually accomplish that? How does he take a man who is actively avoiding his pain and turn him into a change agent?
It starts with an interrogation of silence. In these workshops, Dr. Posey leverages his 8 years of personal therapy and lived experience.
So he's been in the trenches himself.
Absolutely. When a man is sitting in front of him talking about his failed marriage or his explosive anger, Dr. Posey isn't just listening to the narrative being offered. He is specifically listening to what the man avoids, what he aggressively defends, and where he goes completely silent.
Oh, I see. He's listening for the gaps in the story.
Precisely. If a man spends 20 minutes blaming his ex-wife for their divorce, but gets highly defensive or shuts down the moment his own childhood is brought up, that's a landmine.
A huge red flag.
Yes. And Dr. Posey's tactical tool is to map that evasion. He forces the individual to walk back over the ground they are trying to sprint past. Healing in the N2P framework is not a passive state of sitting in a circle and just feeling better. It is a purposeful, rigorous operation.
It sounds intense.
It is. The workshops focus on breaking down behaviors into cause and effect, forcing men to answer for the secondary damage their unaddressed trauma is causing to the people around them.
Wait, hold on. There is a massive friction here that I can't quite wrap my head around.
What's that?
Well, Marine training, especially at the gunnery sergeant level, is fundamentally about suppressing your individual emotions to serve the collective unit. You are taught to compartmentalize your feelings so you can execute the mission, right?
Right, that's the standard military mindset.
But emotional healing requires the exact opposite. It is messy, unstructured, and deeply individual. How does a career Marine reconcile that rigid stoicism with the absolute vulnerability required to unpack childhood trauma without, just short-circuiting?
That is the central paradox of his work, but it's also the secret to its success. He doesn't abandon the discipline, he redirects it.
Redirects it how?
The stoicism he learned in the Marines isn't used to suppress the emotion anymore. The discipline is used to sustain the work. Facing your own generational trauma is terrifying. Most people run away from it or deflect with anger because the feelings of inadequacy and unlovability are just too overwhelming.
Yeah, it's easier to run.
Exactly. But what the Marine mindset provides is the fortitude to stay in the room. It is the commitment to say, this conversation about how I ruined my relationship is excruciating, but I am not going to retreat.
Oh, wow.
The discipline isn't about not feeling, it's about not quitting when the feelings get agonizingly hard.
So it's deploying that military fortitude toward a completely new target. Instead of enduring physical hardship or combat stress, you are enduring emotional honesty. You are holding the line on your own truth. You are refusing to abandon the mission of your own recovery.
And that framework makes the concept of healing accessible to men who might otherwise reject traditional therapy. He presents it as a structured campaign.
A campaign. I like that framing.
Yeah, you establish a baseline of where you are, you identify the objective of who you want to be, and you execute the plan even when it hurts.
Which really explains why he is so obsessed with scaling this blueprint. I mean, he has an extensive library of literary contributions, over 15 published books with titles like Make a Better Choice for Love and The Living Solution.
He's incredibly prolific.
He is. And on his YouTube channel, he's actively breaking down topics like how a lack of mental health management actively blocks men from maintaining relationships. He is putting the tools out there for anyone willing to pick them up.
Because he recognizes that the cycle of dysfunction relies on ignorance and isolation. By publishing these blueprints and speaking publicly, he is dismantling that isolation.
Shedding light on it.
Right. He is showing men that their highly specific secret pain is actually a common, solvable equation if they're willing to put in the work.
So bringing all of this together for the listener who asked us to dive into this material today, what is the ultimate takeaway for your own life based on Dr. Posey's philosophy? The core message is incredibly empowering, even if it carries a really heavy demand.
It definitely asks a lot of you.
It does. You cannot fix your parents. You cannot go back in a time machine and rewrite the environment you were raised in. But you can be the one to stop the cycle. Personal growth does not require you to have had perfect parents. It requires you to be a conscious adult who is willing to build a new foundation based on the truth, rather than spending your energy protecting your family's old lies.
And the ultimate goal of doing all this exhausting, painful work is summed up in his objective. Make your children greater than yourself.
That is powerful.
It is about taking absolute responsibility for the legacy you are leaving behind. It's the realization that you are either transmitting your trauma to the next generation or you're transforming it.
Transmitting it or transforming it. I mean, no one is going to stop your family's dysfunction but you. That is Dr. Posey's ultimate call to action.
Yep. The buck stops with you.
It is a daily, deliberate choice between repeating the mistakes you inherited blindly or actively doing the grueling work to build a new field of love that produces peace and discipline in your own home. It's about choosing to be the architect of your family's future rather than a victim of its past.
And doing that requires you to grab a flashlight, go down into the dark of your own history, and finally inspect what your house is actually built on.
Which leaves us with a lingering thought for you to mull over today as you process this deep dive into Dr. Posey's life and work. If violence, self-sabotage, and anger are truly just pain looking for language, and if generational dysfunction survives solely on our willingness to stay quiet, what is the loudest unsaid truth in your own family history that is secretly shaping the decisions you made today?
That is a profound question that demands an honest answer.
Go inspect that foundation. Thanks for listening.